Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another session of CMS University. My name is John Hughes, and I'm honored to be the music director of the Chicago Master Singers. Tonight is a very special session of CMS University because we have our very first guest speaker, composer Elaine Hagenberg. Now, Elaine and I have known each other for a long time and have collaborated several times, and I've performed many of her pieces of music. And I'm so excited to share her music with you and help you get to know my good friend. Now, one thing that's really exciting is that I have some questions prepared for her, obviously, but you can ask her questions as well. This is interactive. So at the end of our time together, we'll open up the floor and you can ask her some questions. So in order to do so, please make sure you're logged into YouTube. And then you can use the chat, which I can see is already going quite well. During our interview, you can make questions and comments to each other, kind of have a side discussion. And then at the end of the evening, when it's time to ask Elaine some questions, please address those with 4 question marks so that I can quickly identify those. There's no need to be an official member of CMS to enjoy the chat or to ask Elaine a question. If you're here, you're part of CMS University, and we're glad for that. All right, without any further ado, let's give a warm CMS University welcome to composer Elaine Hagenberg.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me, and it's an honor to be here and spend this time with you.
Well, thank you so much, and we're grateful for the technology that allows us to be together, even though we're a couple states away. So, first question for you, Elaine, tonight is, how did you get your start in composing? When did you begin writing music?
Well, this is probably the number one question that singers and conductors like to ask me is, how did you begin? And my story is quite different than maybe some other composers you might talk to, and the fact that I never knew that I wanted to be a full-time composer. But when I look back on my childhood, I was always creating and always coming up with different musical ideas. And I think at a young age, my mother saw that in me, and she was a piano teacher. And so she started me at a young age on piano. And she, of course, taught me music literacy, how to read, the scales, and really invested and nurtured that at a young age for me. And then when I was a little bit older in later elementary school, I moved to a more advanced piano teacher. And this piano teacher also focused, in addition to classical music, she really wanted me to also do composition assignments. So she would actually, in elementary and middle school, have me writing down some compositions, doing some improvisation in my lessons. And I think she really also nurtured this creative part that was always within me. And I remember as a little girl back in the 80s having a little tape recorder at my piano, and I would tape record some of these ideas. But like I said, even at a young age, I was already experimenting with how do I create a melody? How do I put 2 lines together? And then once I got to middle school and high school, I was in the choir, like probably all of you. But most of the time, once I got to high school, I was not singing. I was at the piano and I was accompanying, and without even knowing it, I was learning how to do score study. And my high school director was so influential in my life, and I think she saw some potential in me and some gifts that maybe I didn't even see it yet in myself. But she gave me a lot of great opportunities, and I would not only read the piano parts, of course, but I was doing open score reading, and I was reading the soprano, alto, the tenor, bass, and I was observing voice leading and texture and how does the accompaniment fit with the voices? All without me even realizing it, I was learning about how to construct choral pieces. So when I was 18 years old, of course, graduating high school and looking at going into college, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew that it was going to be music because my heart was music, my passion was music, but I wasn't really sure what I should do. So at the time, what felt most natural was the piano. That's where I was most comfortable, and all my scholarships were piano scholarships. So I went to college to study piano, and I was a piano major. But I was also in the university choir. And at that time, I was singing rather than accompanying. And I fell in love with choral music. And I loved the texts and I loved the human voice, the sounds that we can make together. And what I really loved is the collaborative nature. And you all understand that as choral singers. When you play piano, it's a very solitary instrument. You're in your a practice room by yourself, sometimes for hours. But when you're in choir, it's so much more than what one person can produce. It's the beauty of all the voices coming together around common themes and creating just this absolutely glorious sound. And all my best friends were in choir. And so after that first year, I really decided that I wanted to study music ed. And so I wanted to be a choir director. I wanted to be a teacher. And I wanted to give these beautiful choral experiences that I had had and to share those with younger singers and to nurture students. So I switched my major to music education. And after college, I did teach secondary vocal music for a couple years. So you're probably thinking, how did you still start composing? This has nothing to do with composition. Well, when I look back on my life, I see, of course, those early years where I was improvising and experimenting at the piano. And then when I had my senior piano recital, I actually performed 2 original compositions. And when I was in college and taking the theory classes, I did not necessarily like theory and all the rules, but I loved the composition assignments. I looked forward to them every semester when maybe some of the other students were dreading them. I couldn't wait to have the composition assignments. And so I'll take all of those experiences. I'd really never formally done much with those interests that I had in creating those ideas. But now fast forward. I'm 28 years old at the time, and I was now a stay-at-home mom. So picture I had a 2-year-old and also newborn twins. So I had 3 children, ages 2 and under. And it was a challenge, obviously. I loved it. It was a really sweet time in our life. I didn't sleep for about 2 years straight. But it was a season in my life where there was no music. So all of the music had paused. I was not teaching any longer. I wasn't playing. I wasn't singing. But for the very first time, composition became my creative outlet. And so I would get all the children asleep, tucked in bed, and I'd sneak down to the piano and I'd stir up a little cappuccino. And I would sit there and I just had a simple spiral manuscript notebook with all the staves, and I would just start to write down my ideas. And I didn't really have any goals. I didn't really have a vision or what I wanted to accomplish. It was just fun for me to sit and for the first time write down these thoughts that I'd been having, these melodies, these different little harmonies, and to put them down on paper rather than just improvise. And so one day I was doing a little internet research call, and I found a call for scores. So it's a competition where they were asking for choral pieces, new choral compositions. And I thought, I've never written a choral piece, but I've sung in choirs and I've taught choir and I know how to write out a soprano, alto, bass and a little piano accompaniment. So I wrote my very first choral piece, and then I downloaded a free version of Finale, music notation software. And with my mouse, I didn't have a keyboard, I just had a piano. So with my mouse, I literally clicked in every single note with my mouse. And I finished up this little piece, and then I sent it off to the competition. And I really wasn't sure if it was any good or not, but it didn't matter because I just had so much fun writing the piece. It was just an enjoyable process. I was writing my ideas down. It was my musical creative outlet at that season in my life. And several weeks went by. And then I received a letter in the mail, and the letter said that I was one of the winners, my very first piece.
Congratulations.
And I have to tell you what I won. So this is the best part, John. I won $25.
That sounds like the creative arts.
But I have to be honest, there was a $20 entry fee, so I won $5.
Hey, even better.
Even more impressive, right?
Right.
So of course it was not about the $5 that I won, but it was just the realization that something that I had written and composed that existed only in my mind and in my living room there were actual people somewhere that were breathing life into these notes. And I was hooked after that. I couldn't wait to write another piece. So I wrote my second piece. I sent it off to another competition and it got a performance in California. And so far, I had only shared music with strangers. But if I really wanted to experience my music live, I was going to have to share it with someone local. And that felt a little bit more vulnerable. So I shared a piece with a local high school teacher friend, and she said, yeah, sure, I'd love to put it on my spring high school concert. And so I got to hear the music live for the first time in the same room. And it was completely different than playing it on the piano, right? Because then I heard the vowels and I could hear the breathing together and I could really hear the sound of the voices connecting together with the breath. And it was a rush, it was a thrill. And I just loved that opportunity of being in the same room, making music together. And so then after that, every concert led to more concerts and led to more concerts, because there was always someone at a concert that said, I really enjoyed that piece. Do you have another piece? Or could I do that piece in my concert? And so very slowly, very organically, more and more people started doing my music. And then I thought, well, what if I got brave and sent a piece to a publisher? And so I got two pieces as edited, as tidy and perfect as I could. I had two nice recordings from these pieces. And so I sent them off to a publisher. And months went by, I waited, and I thought I might not ever hear back.
Painful.
And that's okay. I know, that's okay. But eventually I heard back 11 months later, and they said no to one piece, but they said yes to the other piece. And I was going to have my very first published piece. And obviously I was thrilled, and very similar to how every concert led to another concert. Well, every published piece led to another published piece, because they would ask, do you have maybe another piece that could also be a good fit for our catalog? Or other publishers started reaching out to me saying, we heard this piece of yours. Do you have something that would also be a good fit maybe for our publishing company? And then I started taking more commissions where conductors would contact me and say, our university is having an event, will you write us a piece? Or there's a festival coming up and we'd love to have you write a piece for us. So then I started to have a full commission schedule. I had publisher deadlines. Eventually started traveling too, to work with different choirs around the country. And it became apparent that I could no longer be a teacher and a full-time composer. It really felt like two full-time jobs. And as much as I loved working with high school students and being in the classroom, I really felt like my heart was composing. It was my passion. And I just love how composing allows me to say things with music that I might not be able to articulate with words. I feel like I can say things through the harmonies or through a phrase or a little melody that I can draw things out and express things that maybe it just feels absolutely impossible to say with words. So I'm so grateful for these opportunities and to collaborate with conductors like you and singers. If it was just me, the music would exist in my own house or in my mind, but I really value the partnership that I have with ensembles that bring these works to life. And then we get to have these moments where we come together around these beautiful texts that express something deeply and sometimes profound. And we get to talk about these shared human experiences, hope and despair and longing, but also encouragement. And then we get to give that to our audiences too. And when they hear these pieces and these beautiful texts and the chords that the choir sings, they then are encouraged too. So it's a privilege to get to do what we do in this choral field. And I'm so grateful to partner with choirs and conductors like all of you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's so interesting. There's so many follow-up questions, but the first one I want to ask right away is that first piece that won a competition, is that in print? Do we know that piece?
It is. It is. That
what
very
piece
first
is that?
piece is called It Is Not Always May. So you'll have to look it up. It's published with Hinshaw Music. And a fun side note to that. So again, here I am, 28 years old, writing my very first piece of music. I didn't know what I was doing. A year ago, last April, it was performed at Carnegie Hall. And I got to walk across the Carnegie Hall stage, sit at their Steinway and accompany this huge, beautiful choir. And who would have thought that when I was 28 years old, stirring up my cappuccino with babies sleeping and writing in my little spiral notebook? I had no idea. And my goal was never to be at Carnegie Hall or to get published, or I just was pouring out my heart onto this little spiral notebook.
That's a great story. Thank you. So one thing that you talked about was that makes choral music so special is text, right? I think a lot of us love, us choral people not only are there for the music, but we're there for the text, right? We get to sing some of the most beautiful poetry in the world, and it's so rich. And, this separates choral and just vocal music from all other kinds of music. So what's it like writing with a text, and how do you choose a text, and what do you look for when you're trying to kind of elevate it musically?
Right. So finding a text is always a challenge, and I'm always on the search for beautiful words that will lend themselves to music and lend themselves to the human voice. And for me, the very most important thing is they have to be personal to me, and they have to have a connection in some way. So oftentimes texts that I am personally drawn to are texts that have subjects such as elements of my faith, or maybe they take us on a journey, or they're inspirational, or maybe they have a longing and a desire, but then there's a happy ending at the end. I'm always a sucker for a happy ending. And so you'll notice that even though there might be some searching and some darkness, but there's going to be some kind of light that appears and offers hope. And so those types of themes, and often those types of themes come through beautiful imagery of nature. And so an ocean or a starry night, and the piece that we're going to listen to in a little bit, which those things actually represent so much more than literally an ocean or literally the wind, or so much more than sand. What do they actually represent? And so those kinds of layered meanings where there's so much interpretation in text, where it might mean one thing to me, but John, it means something else to you. But then we come together and we realize, oh, we're actually the same, and they unite us and they connect us and they make us feel together and bonded. And then our audience feels connected just because of these rich texts that we get to sing and we get to find. And so I'm always on the search for a great text. And sometimes when I'm reading and getting ideas, I can read tons of beautiful texts, but nothing. I hear no music. And then all of a sudden, one will hit me. And sometimes it's just one word. And it's like this spark, this flame of musical momentum where I start to hear melodies and I hear chords and I hear phrases. And I think, oh, this is going to be the piece. It's like, this is the one. And then the music can happen quite organically. I feel like it makes so many of the musical decisions for me. So if it's a text with a yearning, well, maybe I'm going to use some dissonance, and maybe it's going to start minor, and I can make those decisions without even sitting down at the piano. Or maybe this is going to be sustained notes, or maybe this is a really joyful piece. Oh, this is like a 7/8, and I hear it's an E major or something. And all of that comes from just reading the poetry. And then my job, of course, after that is to see how can I use these musical elements, the form and the rhythms and the melodies and the harmonies. How can I weave all these things together and be honest to this text and really come alongside and the composers like to say illuminate the text, and then that is my goal, to illuminate that text so we can share that with others.
Yeah, I think that development of a motivic seed is so crucial, right? And it's I think a lot of us musicians have had kind of a melody come to mind or whatever, but don't really know what to do with it. And that's really the craft of composition, right? It's like, right. Okay, you have a great idea, now what? How do you develop this into a 4-minute piece that has rise and fall and everything else?
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. And you'll notice in a lot of my pieces, there's maybe only 2 or 3 ideas. And so then that's the challenge, is how do I connect those ideas? How do I develop those ideas and be honest to that text that we talked about?
Yeah. So one other thing I really like, speaking of craft, with your works in particular, is that you write so well for the piano. It's not sometimes piano can seem like an accompaniment, or like it's there to support the singers only. But when I look at your compositions, it's really like a collaboration between piano and the choir. Can you talk a little bit about how you approach writing for the piano?
Yeah, absolutely. And when I first started, so that very first piece that I told you about, I had no clue how to write a choral piece, right? So I wrote out the SATB parts and the voices, and then afterwards I thought, how could I add a piano part to this? Whereas now when I'm constructing a piece, and that first piece worked, it was fine, it was successful.
It won a
But
competition.
now it won a little competition. I won $5. but but now when I approach writing, I'm really thinking at the same time. Even though it's one of the last things that I actually notate, I'm improvising either at the piano, or I have ideas in my head of how can this support the voices, how can it talk about enhancing or illuminating that text. But really the piano sets the mood of the piece. It creates this sound world for us to enter into. And so several of my pieces, they'll have a dramatic introduction that kind of paints the picture. What are we about to see? What kind of, is it major, minor? But even more than that, is it I think we can notice the rhythms. We can notice a little foreshadowing of what's to come, and then I love to not just make it accompaniments, like you said. I want it to be a very collaborative role. And in some of my pieces, there's almost like little concerto-like moments in the piano accompaniments. Or if you take a look, the voices will be sustaining; they'll be singing whole notes. But take a look at what's happening in the piano down below, because those piano elements are coming through those sustained pitches. And those transitions are really, I think the piano is key in some of those transitions, leading from section to section. Like you talked about developing ideas. A lot of times I can accomplish that through the piano. And because I have the background, I really thank my high school piano teacher, who had me playing Chopin and Brahms and Rachmaninoff, and just exposing me to lots of different ways to construct piano parts. And I still, for fun in the evenings, I'll just open a book of Chopin preludes or an old, Brahms piece that I used to play, and just enjoy the harmonies. And I'll notice things now as an adult that I maybe didn't notice as a teenager, and just appreciate. But I think all of those backgrounds in piano really inform the piano accompaniment decisions that I make today.
Excellent. Well, let's take a little break, and we're going to listen to a beautiful recording of Elaine's The Music of Stillness, which I think demonstrates not only superb text setting that we've already talked about, but a really powerful piano. So listen for kind of some of these elements that we've talked about already. Let me see if I can do this correctly. Let's see. I don't know how many I've conducted that before, and I've listened to that piece so many times. I still I had to wipe my eyes during it. It's so beautiful. Thank you, Elaine, for composing that and bringing that to life for us. It's really a lovely piece. It was recently announced that you were awarded the Raymond Brock Commission from the American Choral Directors Association for their upcoming conference in the spring. And this is a huge deal. This is one of the highest honors in choral music in this country. What's it like to get that award? And can you tell us a little bit about what you're writing?
Well, it's of course a huge honor. There are so many wonderful people writing right now, and I was just thrilled at the announcement, thrilled at the honor, and the piece actually has already been written. It's called "I Am the Wind," and it's a text by Zoe Atkins, and so it's for SSA choir and piano, and it will be premiered at our upcoming virtual conference in some way. And so I'm looking forward to sharing that piece with more people in the choral community, of course.
So you mentioned that it's SSA, so for treble voices. What's it like? Is that a different writing process than when you're writing for mixed voices with soprano, alto, tenor, bass?
No, it's not. In fact, I mean, you might assume there are lots of voices singing, so it's easier, right? Or it takes less time. No, the process is exactly the same as when I'm writing for mixed voices. I think there's a beauty to having just treble voices. And so I get excited about having 3-part harmony and 4-part harmony and even 5-part harmony in this piece. And I knew this piece could be unlimited difficulty. And so there's big ranges, there's lots of cross voicing where I might tend to be a little bit more conservative in my voicing typically for a commissioned piece. But this piece, I knew that I could really expand the ranges, and I could really go full out with the accompaniment. The last page is just left-handed, minor and busy and churning and passionate. And I think I give a high C to that first soprano. And I had a lot of fun writing this piece. So like I said, I'm excited for more people within ACDA to get to hear that at the upcoming virtual conference.
Yeah, I can't wait. I know we talked kind of off air a little bit about a piece that you're also writing, which is a longer work. I think a lot of what I know of your music is kind of octavo length pieces like the music of Stillness or Oh Love or all the pieces we love, Still with Lee, which you wrote for my college choir. But now you're writing an extended work with multiple movements and string orchestra. Again, kind of what's that writing process like, and how is it different than writing a 5-minute piece?
Right. So I am obviously super excited about this piece. And this is the current piece that I'm working on right now. So as you mentioned, most of the pieces that I work on, most of the commissions I get are 3 to 5 minute pieces. And so I'll find one text and I will explore some musical ideas. And I'm usually pretty efficient in my writing because most people don't want it to be like a 5.5 minute piece is actually a pretty long piece for choral music. But now with the opportunity to write a 20, 22, 25 minute piece, I have 5 movements mapped out, and I've been researching this. I've been wanting to do this project for a couple years now, and finally it's the time in my schedule, in my commissioning writing schedule, where I really get to dig into these texts. And what I'm enjoying about the process is I can really develop these ideas, whereas I might try to accomplish an idea in 8 measures and then move on. Well, I can expand that to 16 or 30 and develop that and have a little bit of an instrumental interlude and use the strings, maybe have a little bit longer introduction to a movement. And then what I'm really excited about is the fact that it's creatively exhausting sometimes to write so many smaller pieces. But what I'm loving is that I can take a little element, and actually the very first part that I wrote was an element of movement 4. And why would I write movement 4 first? Well, it's because there's this little musical motive that I want to be able to weave in movement 1, movement 2. And then when it appears fully in movement 4, you think, oh, you see the full picture. And then I get to expand that idea. So movement number 5 is going to have some mirroring elements that you heard in movement 1. And so just an opportunity to really tell a story, have this narrative that it doesn't have to be accomplished in 4 minutes. It could be 24 minutes. And to develop the musical ideas, tell the story, have the drama of the tension and the dissonance of the story. You know, every good story is going to have a conflict, but how is it going to be resolved? And then you already know, spoiler alert, I'm a sucker for a happy ending. So there will be, of course, a happy ending at the very end of the 5th movement, but there's going to be a journey and how we get there. And there's going to be just some rawness and some honesty too. I feel like every piece that I write is a little snapshot of my life. And so when I write music of stillness, that's a snapshot of what I was experiencing at that time in my life, and what was I feeling, and why was I drawn to that text. And there was a little bit of loneliness, and you hear that there's a little bit of ache, but then there's also hope, and there's beauty, and then there's coming together. And when I write a fast, joyful piece, well, that's a fast, joyful, that's a snapshot of my life when things were great. And when I write Oh Love, well, maybe that was a snapshot of when, you know, I was kind of in a valley at that time, but it produced this dissonance, produced hope, and knowing that there will be no more tears. Mourn shall tearless be. And so I feel like this extended work is a snapshot of, you know, the 6 months of what we're living in. And, you know, maybe things were great in the beginning, but, you know, things kind of took a shift and caught all of us off guard, and we're really unsuspected. And how do we process that? And where does that leave us? And the hope that I have for us as humanity, and also the choral world. And I think all of those emotions that I've been feeling, that we've all been feeling, you know, it's kind of been like this. And all of that is going into this extended piece. And so it's due January 15th. And so the deadline is coming, and I have my schedule all mapped out very methodically about each week what needs to be accomplished. But my goal is, you know, it's going to be finished mid-January, and then I can't wait. The premieres will be happening for a full 12 months after that January date. And so I'll be excited to start sharing that with the choral world and all the people that have joined that consortium for this extended piece.
It's really exciting, and it just strikes me too, like we were talking about at the beginning about craft, right? Developing an idea, you know, over a 4-minute piece is really hard, right? Try holding your breath for 4 minutes, right? That's a long amount of time. And now we're in 30 minutes, you know, that really shows your craft. And just hearing you talk about it strikes me how much you put into this. It's not just this comes to mind and I write it down, but it's a very intellectual process.
It is, and it was really difficult to narrow down my texts. I think I had about 25, and I can't use all 25 of them, right? And
of course.
So I got them down to about 9, and then I thought, well, this is still too much music, and so then I got them down to 7. And I finally got them down to 5 separate texts for the 5 movements. But there's a lot of planning. I think that's probably the biggest difference.
Sure.
You know, you can plan a 4-minute piece pretty quickly, but to plan a 25-minute piece, that's years for me. That has been years of planning, and now I'm finally getting to do the writing from all the research and planning that I've been doing.
Well, that's great. I can't wait to hear the piece. So let's take just got to write it first. Let's take a minute, and we'll take some audience questions here. I think some of these I'm going to skip because we've already talked about them, but here's a quick first one from Deb. She says, do you have a favorite key?
Oh, of course. D flat major.
Of course, right?
So many people love D.
Yeah, of
but
course.
I also feel like it fits really well in the hands. And it's warm, and there's a depth to it. So that's why Music of Stillness, the piece that you heard, it starts in that D flat major. It has this that holy and low text. It's just warm and it's good. And then when it modulates, of course, then it goes to the big climax of the piece. It's a bright B major. And I love how you even see all the sharps on the page, and it's like these shining stars illuminating. And for me, I wasn't very good at planning when I was still learning to write. And so this piece, I didn't have the whole form figured out on Music of Stillness. It was just kind of write a few measures and see what comes next, and write a few measures and see what comes next. And I really didn't know what came next. I just kind of got to the middle of the piece, and I was in my D flat major and wandering around to different keys. And then one day I found B major. I immediately got tears in my eyes, the goosebumps, right? That we all have had that feeling singing before. And I knew it was right. I knew B major, here we are, we're under the stars, everything's going to be okay. Let those sopranos soar and let's just sing together. And actually my favorite part is the bass line, when they have that little ascending motive and let them weave up and dip down. But that's a long answer, Deb.
I like it. Someone asked, do you ever set your own text, or is it always or most often other people's texts?
It is often always other people's texts. The only thing that I will do on my own is scripture. Bible verses are really hard to set.
Sure.
Just because it's a translation, right? And so sometimes the English translation can feel a little bit clumsy singing. And so what you'll see is sometimes I'll say adapted by. So I'll take the gist of the scripture, of the psalm, or whatever the portion is that I'm using, and then I'll just try to make it as smooth and singable without losing any of the meaning, to make it as singable as possible so it's not clunky or clumsy for the voice.
Sure. Alicia says, when you compose, in general, are you writing for yourself, subjects, melodies, harmonies that you enjoy, or are you writing with specific performers in mind?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I actually have two answers for this, because I have two different approaches. The first thing is, if I have a choir that is commissioning me, of course I'm going to ask as many questions as I can. So, do you want this to be with piano? Do you want it unaccompanied? How many people are in your ensemble? Tell me, how much divisi would you like? Tell me, what are the ranges? Like, how high do your sopranos feel comfortable? How about the basses? Do you have enough tenors? Can I give them divisi? So I will write specifically for that group because I want to set them up for success. I want them to feel really good about the piece that they sing. I don't want to write them something too hard. I don't want to write them something too easy. I want to really come alongside them and match their abilities so they feel really good about the piece that they're singing. But I will say there's a second element to this, and this goes all the way back to picking out the text. I know that the piece will turn out better if the text is genuine and authentic to me. So if I try to write about something I know nothing about, being a fireman, I'm just thinking of this off the top of my head. Like, I could write a piece about putting out a fire, but I'm not a fireman and I can imagine it, but it might sound kind of contrived. But if I write about something that I know about, being in the mountains, or the feeling that you have under the stars that we were talking about, or what it's like to take my kayak on the lake, or, these experiences, and how does that make me feel? And then that layered meaning, like, what does that river represent? Like, to me, those authentic texts, those authentic experiences, well, then that creates authentic music. And it's honest writing, those little snapshots of my life, like Oh Love, Music of Stillness. And when I am honest with the reality of where I am, and if I pour that out honestly in my music, well, then I think the singers feel that too. And that's when you start to have authentic experiences, because you get it. You feel it. There's something more than notes. We're not singing notes anymore. We're singing music. And then you're having authentic experiences because it reminds you of your grandma, or it reminds you of that time that you were in this beautiful place and this happened, with this memory. And then, you were sad, but now you feel hope. And then when you have an authentic experience as a singer, well, then the audience sees that. They hear that. They sense that. It is... You can't escape it in a performance. It's just so real in the air. And then that's the beauty. It's the magic. It's why you're all singers. You understand. You feel it when you sing pieces together and the orchestra is with you. And Um, so for me, it really starts from a really, I want to write music that will really serve the singers. But at the same time, I know if it comes from a truly authentic place, it will serve the singers best. And that's why I try to find topics too that aren't too specific. So I'm not going to write a topic about I don't have a dog, but if I did, if I wrote a song about my dog, you'd think, well, that's nice. She has a dog, but I don't. But if I write a song about loyalty or a song about camaraderie or about friendship or community, well, then that's something everybody can really come together and embrace and encourage one another in. And so it's both. It's for you, but it's coming from an authentic place for me as well.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Evan asks if you've ever thought about writing something that works especially well for virtual choirs, since we're in the age of virtual choirs.
Yes, I did. I actually just wrote a brand new piece. And if you go to my website, yeah, it's called, so go to my website. It's called ElaineHagenberg.com. And there's a resources tab. And I wrote a free piece of music, just a free gift to the choral music this last summer. And I worked with lyricist Brian Newhouse in Minnesota. And he wrote two beautiful texts. And I told Brian my vision. I said, we don't know what the fall is going to be like for choirs, and some choirs could be virtual, some could be meeting in person, there could be a hybrid. And how can we write music that will work in all these situations? And so he wrote these two texts, so lovely. The first one, and they're called Songs from Silence. And the first one talks about the ache of not being able to sing, but then it turns from G minor to G major, and then you hear that hope, that happy ending that I love to talk about. And it's adaptable, so it could be done SSAA, it could be done TTBB, because instead of writing soprano, alto, tenor, bass, it's just voice 1, voice 2, voice 3, voice 4. So you could do it with 1 tenor, 3 altos, 1 bass, and 17 sopranos, or any combination. It should hopefully work. And so it's been fun to see people starting to perform that, people downloading that. And if you would like to try that, if you are a choral member or another group, or you have a church choir, or you have a high school group, or even SA, it works with 2 parts too. Go ahead and grab that free piece of music. That's my gift to all of you during this time.
Wow. Thank you. Yeah, I think we're all looking to each other to keep the singing going. So thank you.
Right.
Dan asked, have you ever composed a requiem? We've talked a lot about requiems so far. Not yet.
I have not yet, but I might get this extended work bug at some point and do some more. So I don't know what's in the future.
We'll do a couple more here. So Eileen says, do you write the most difficult part first when you're composing? I think that must have been a specific question when you were talking about writing the extended work.
Oh, no, not necessarily. I think I have mapped out kind of I have a general idea of what's going to happen in each movement. I've looked at the text and I've made some notes, is it kind of major or is it minor, or what kind of mood would honor this text. But really I'm kind of going in order. And even though I said I created this little motive and this little melodic fragment from the fourth movement that I'm going to hide in the first one, a little bit in the second one. Yeah. I do know probably the hardest movement is going to be movement 3, and I can't wait to write that one. But I feel like I need to finish. I have finished the first movement, but I need to finish 2 because I want to know how the transition is going to work, because I can't pick the key until I know what's happening before it.
Very cool. Linda asks, are your children absorbing everything that you are doing musically?
They're good little musicians, but I actually do not push them as hard as maybe you might imagine, because music is my profession. I don't want to put pressure on them. I want it to be fun. And so, for example, my daughter is in 3rd grade, and I have never pressured her to try out for a solo for the Christmas concert because I want it to be her choice. But I let her know, man, she is a good singer. And if she ever wanted to audition, she would do such a good job. Well, guess what? She auditioned for the solo this week. And the music teacher pulled her aside after the class to tell her, what a great job she did, and kind of alluded to the fact that she might be one of the soloists. But
Hey.
my twins, they play cello and violin, and I don't ever want it to be stressful. I always want it to be fun. But if they make goals for themselves, of course I'm going to support them. And probably one of my proudest mom moments was last year when in their youth orchestra, they were first chair violin and first chair cello. So they were up there by the conductor, and to see my twins up there. But again, I wanted it to be their goal. And my other son is a great singer too, and he plays in trombone. So he's in jazz band and marching band and does that. So they all have their things. They all have instruments. And my daughter does piano too. But they think it's not a big deal that their mom's a composer. But every mom composes, right?
Right.
So,
right.
they just, it's just a job. And so I think it's maybe kind of cool, but yeah, they're good little musicians.
That's excellent. Okay, a couple more here if you're up for it still.
Oh, absolutely.
Rick asks, do your publishers ever give you a hard time about writing in a hard key like D flat or B major? He points out that Stephen Paulus started his own publishing company to avoid that.
Yeah, you know what? I've never had pushback, and I think there are keys that sing well too. Mm-hmm. So if you have a key like F sharp major, gosh, that might be a mess in the piano part, but it sings so well. And so I actually personally have never written a piece in G flat or F sharp, but I just know that's a viable option. So if that works for that composer, they should do it. But I do try to find keys that are going to sing well in the voice, keys that are going to tune well for the choir, because I keep coming back to this, but I want to set all of you up for success. I don't want to create more work for the conductor. And then how they feel in the hands. So D flat and B major, they look like a mess on the page, but they fit really well in the hands. They're quite natural actually to play in. So I've never had a publisher tell me no, actually.
Cool. Okay. Alan says, I think up music in my head of all types, but I have no significant musical theory training. What techniques or tools can you recommend that he could use to get his ideas out?
Yeah, so I think one helpful tool is there's so many free music notation software out there. So you can use Finale and Noteflight. Sibelius has a free version, I think, and there are several ones. Just Google free notation software. And then what I tell students, I've got my phone, just sing into your phone, just capture those ideas, and then you can play it back as many times as you need to, and just start to figure out what those notes are. And I think then you can start to figure out what the pitches are. Actually, what I tell students too is just write the pitches. Don't even worry about the rhythms. And then you can go back and start, that's a dotted. Oh, that's actually 16th notes. Put in some bar lines. But just give yourself patience. Don't expect to just be able to dictate things right away. Just record it. And then there's no time frame. Just have patience with yourself. And slowly it will get easier and easier as you do it.
Excellent. All right. Last one is from Michelle. This is a good question. Have you or would you ever consider setting a text that was famously set by another composer in the past? So she says, I'm thinking about Lordson, Sure on the Shining Night, when Barber made that text so famous.
So that was, I would like to call it a mistake of mine, but in hindsight, it's not. So the piece that John played for us, the music of Stillness, at the time when I wrote this piece, I only knew of two other composers that had set this. Frank Ticheli's, which is like super famous. What was I thinking? And then David Dickow has a beautiful setting, which is really well loved and performed. So I could have just been like, okay, these guys, they've done that. But I feel like everyone has their own voice, right? And so mine brings out a different line or different harmonies or different climax. I go to the word dream, where other composers might pick a different focus, or different text repetition to bring back at the end. So after I wrote this piece and I was looking for a publisher for it, and then I found that there was like 15 other composers who had already set this beautiful poem, And I felt a little like, oh my goodness, I shouldn't have done that. But of course I should have, because it has my unique voice and it speaks to people in a different way than maybe another composer would have said it. It speaks to my life experiences and my journey and my choral background, my piano background, my journey as a teacher and a mother. Like all of those elements influenced my style when I was writing that piece. But what I've learned from that is moving forward, in general, now I try to really seek out lesser known texts and to give voice to some people that maybe, not many choral composers have used those poets or used those texts, and to find some unique ones that more people should know about that are really beautiful. So I talked about Zoe Atkins and Harriet Monroe and Harriet Beecher Stowe, and some beautiful voices that I would just love for more people to know their poetry.
Elaine, that's awesome. And thank you so much for joining us this evening at CMS University. It's really been an honor to host you and get to learn more about your music.
Well, it's been my pleasure. So thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you for everyone who attended this evening.
I hope that you've had a fun evening here at CMSU with me and Elaine. I know it's been a real honor for me. So thank you for tuning in. I hope that you'll join me next week when we are talking all about vocal health and warm-ups. It's really important that we are maintaining and even improving our instruments during this time, that we might not be using them in our weekly choral rehearsals, but I am positive that one day this pandemic will be over and we can start singing together again, and we'll want to make sure our instruments are in top-notch shape. So please register using the Eventbrite link in the video description and join us then. Another thing I want to invite you to do is like this video, share it on Facebook, share it with a friend or family member, invite people to come join us at CMS University. The more the merrier. We are accepting donations, so if you are interested, you can donate to our cause here at any of these links. And again, these are all in the video description below. I should also mention that Elaine Hagenberg wrote "Oh Love," which we've talked about several times, and that is going to be the first virtual choir from Chicago Master Singers, and that'll premiere on November 1st. So stay tuned for that. Our moment of Zen tonight is "I Will Be a Child of Peace" by, you guessed it, Elaine Hagenberg. This piece is, I think, just encapsulates so much of Elaine's style in that it is beautiful and sincere and sweet and really emotionally powerful. It's an arrangement of a shaker hymn, and it is in a couple meters, but it kind of centers on 5/4, which is somewhat of an uncommon time signature, but it really works in this piece, and I'm excited to share it with you. So without further ado, this is "I Will Be a Child of Peace" by Elaine Hagenberg. one last thing, please be sure to like Elaine on Facebook, follow her on social media, check out her YouTube channel, check out her website. There's a lot of information and plenty more of her music to listen to. Thank you all. I hope you're doing well, and I'll look forward to seeing you sometime soon. Have a good night.